Thank you. Are you serving food? Is that how you got this many people in here for me? Let me just talk for a minute or two, because I want to answer your questions and answer Skip's questions, the dean's questions, and talk about what you want to talk about, not what some clown from Washington thinks you want to hear. Let me first say how wonderful it is to be back in Little Rock. As the dean noted, I first started coming here actually in 1990 when I was the AP's chief political correspondent to pay attention to this guy named Bill Clinton, because people said he might run for president. And I spent an awful lot of time here in 91 and 92, and then I didn't cover the White House full-time after he won, but I covered him somewhat, and then when I took the CNN job, we would occasionally come back. And I love this city, I love this state, and I have a lot of wonderful, fond memories of it. And it's wonderful to see the transformation of Little Rock, too. It's a great, thriving city now, and I think that's a great gift to the state and to the country. I'm happy to be here at this wonderful institution. I think it is great that part of, I don't pick sides in politics, but part of President Clinton's extension of his commitment in his life in public service is to help support a place like this, where young people can learn and debate and kick things around, and hopefully go on to the world. I just had a fabulous conversation with the students, and if you have any questions about the quality of the people here, you shouldn't, because they're just fascinating kids of every different perspective, asking very good, tough questions, and that's what we need. We need the next generation in this age of polarized, often petty politics, a generation that takes us by the shoulders and shakes us and says, let's talk about real stuff, and let's talk politely, and let's try to figure this out and not just shout at each other. I told them what I'll tell you, that I consider myself the luckiest person alive. I come from pretty modest roots in Boston, and thanks to the good luck in my career over the years, I've covered 6 presidential elections. I've covered the White House for 8.5 years and been to more than 70. I'm closing in on 80 countries around the world. And if they took it all away tomorrow, I would be the luckiest person ever. What I love most about my job now and my new challenge I'm about to accept is that I think, and I'm probably about in the middle looking around this room in terms of age, slightly on the upper half, I think we live in the most consequential times I can remember in my 25 years of doing this. Whether it's the economy, and this is my 45th state in the last 45 weeks, and people are hurting. People are hurting, and they're not just hurting, they're wondering what's going on. If you go to Michigan or any place that makes cars, my grandfather worked there, and my father worked there, and I thought I worked there, and my son was going to work there. There's a way of life changing in parts of the country, and people are scared. We're going to have big debates about climate change and energy. We're in the middle of a huge debate. Great place to talk about health care at the Clinton School. And we could go on and on and on, and then we could look around the world. And the issues are so consequential. And so to be around the young people who are going to actually live and breathe and accept these challenges was a wonderful thing for me. And as a journalist and someone who has to cover these issues, it is a spectacular time and a consequential time and an important time. And I said this in there, and I'll say it again out here, my business needs a little shaking and changing and, shall we say, learning. To try to find a way to communicate with you in a way that is helpful and informative and relevant, and yes, compelling, even a little entertaining, not entertainment, but a little entertaining, meaning that you want to stay and watch and learn more and listen without going off on an ideological path or an irrelevant path. That's how I view my job. Let me stop there, let Skip ask some questions and let you ask some questions, but it's a gift to be here, and I thank you all for turning out. This is an amazing turnout, and I think as you celebrate the 5th anniversary of the Clinton Center and just reflect on the moment we live in, I do think it is an incredibly important time, and for everyday citizens, no matter what you do, and for people either in public service or in the job of what I have is watching and observing and keeping the public servants accountable. It's a fascinating and important time, and I'm about to enter a new challenge, and I love it. I'm very excited by it.
Well, we'll talk about your new challenge here in a minute, but I want to ask you a question that you've been traveling in 45 states. We lived through 1994 after the election of Bill Clinton in 92 and a Republican sweep in 1994. Is 2010 going to be like 1994?
If I said I knew, then I should resign right now, because it's my job to watch and learn, not to predict. But you do see some of the ingredients now that you saw if you traveled the country a lot in 1993. Part of it is the inevitable pendulum of American politics. After a presidential election, one party wins, whether it's Ronald Reagan, whether it's Barack Obama. In a big movement presidential election, the pendulum swings a little further than it probably, quote unquote, should, meaning the country goes a little beyond where it is. This is, over the past 50, 60 years, been a fairly predictable, just center-right or just center-left country. Look at the governors. Don't look at Washington necessarily. Look at the mix of how many Democrats, how many Republican governors you have. Look at the relatively even divides in Congress. Until now, Republicans took a thumping in 2006, a bigger thumping in 2008. You have a Democratic president and pretty good Democratic majorities in the Congress. Some of those Democrats in the Congress, and again, understand what I'm saying here, I don't mean it quite the way it sounds, don't deserve their seats, meaning they hold Republican seats. They're just in places that normally would not elect a Democrat. That's some of what happened in '94, some of the people that Bill Clinton swept in, or even the Times. I won't give it all the credit to then Governor, then President Clinton, but the Times swept in. You had the Perot candidacy back then, as you remember. People were mad. They thought Washington was just this place that wasn't answering their questions, wasn't speaking to them. The seeds of that are there now. Is that what will happen a year from now? Who knows? But I look at it this way because I think sometimes we make things too complicated. We could debate health care right now, but we don't know the end of the story. So it's a good debate, some interesting questions, but if we're trying to apply it to next year, in some ways we're wasting our time. We could sit here now and say, will the unemployment rate be 10.5, 10.6, or 9.7 by next November? We don't know the answer to that question. And it might be very different in different states. That's something you have to worry about in a midterm election. What Michigan does might be very different than what Nevada does and what Arkansas does. It's a very complicated jigsaw puzzle when you have a 50-state country in which a lot of the states don't really fit with each other, except that they do. So I look at it this way. The fundamental promise of Barack Obama was to change Washington. And you will put some of the most liberal, passionate Obama supporters you can find across from some of the most conservative, oh my God, I can't believe he's president people, and they will agree that Washington doesn't seem to have changed much. And in that environment, the other guys win. That's how it works. Not always, but they're in charge. Is it all their fault? No. Is it ever all their fault? I'm sure in 1994 he didn't think it was all their fault. But that's the way it goes. And the most interesting dynamic to me in the country right now, and this is troublesome if it lasts, if the quicksand turns into cement, is that people have this fundamental mistrust of institutions. It's whether you supported or didn't support the war in Iraq, I don't think there are too many people in this room who would jump up and argue that it was managed well. If you watched what the government did after Katrina, whether you want to blame President Bush or the governor or the mayor of New Orleans, it was not managed well. Then you had the banking crisis come along, and a lot of people in this room probably lost tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. And the perception in a lot of Main Street America is that after that, they took your tax dollars and gave them to some guy in a suit on Wall Street for a bonus who just lost all your money. Now he's getting more of your money. Is that exactly what happened? Probably not. But do a lot of people feel that way? Yes. And so people are mad and mistrustful of institutions. And when you have that mood in the country, they take it out on the people in charge. It's just how it works. With winning comes responsibility, comes the kick me or the target me sign on the back of you. And right now, that would be on the Democrats. Between now and next November, so much could change that I think it's a safe bet that the Democrats will lose seats in the midterm election. Will they lose what they're supposed to lose, meaning the accidental seats, plus or minus a few? Or will there be a wave like 1994? That's what makes my job so interesting in the next 6 or 8 months.
In terms of your job, the role of, cable, all the various news sources, the students, by the way, sort of got him in the student session when they were talking about that Jon Stewart and Colbert were their news sources, and my friend Mr. King sort of took that in a constructive way, but he wouldn't, I think, call them news people. But it was a fair point on the part of the students. Discuss what's happening in journalism from your opinion, having come from print to television, the newspapers, cable. What's happening? What do we see? What's going to happen?
My business, like everything else in our lives, and I mean everything, our politics, our homes, our jobs, everything in our lives is in the middle of a fundamental and striking and sometimes hard to understand transition because of technology, because of changes. The world is so much smaller. And so you have a technological revolution that allows us in cable television, through the internet, through all the devices the dean just asked you to turn off, allows you access to information when you want it. The news business was built like the car industry. GM, Ford, and Chrysler said, this is what we're going to build, you're going to buy it. Sure, we'll give you red and blue and black and yellow, but we'll tell you where the radio is, we'll tell you where the gas tank is. We design the car, you buy it. You don't have a choice. The news business was built that you'll watch at 6:30 at night. We'll throw the newspaper in your driveway when we want, or you'll go to a newsstand and get it, but you don't have a choice. Well, now you have a choice, in part because Ted Turner decided to launch this thing called the 24-Hour News Network, and in part because even if he had not done that, the technological changes in the 20-plus, 30 years since, somebody else would have, whether it's on the internet, whether it's on television. The choices now have just multiplied, so that you decide. The arrogant structure of any industry saying we can tell you what you will get, when you will get it, is gone because of the explosion of technology. Now you decide. And that's great. That's it. We are here because of this great experiment called free speech and freedom of thought and freedom of discussion and freedom of association and freedom of religion. So we can't fight it. We would be foolish to fight it. There are a lot of, but yet the American auto industry fought it. The American news industry fought it. Your instinct is to fight it because it's change and it's scary. Now you're in this world where the business is changing, which is why I go back, at a time of change, I think you need to go back to what are your core principles. You need to be more interesting. You need to adapt to technology. You need to understand now that we need to have a conversation. I need to have a conversation with you, the people I want to watch me and trust me. I need to have a conversation with you. Am I covering the stories you want covered? Can't always listen to you. There are some things that you might not want me to cover that are pretty big and important. But I at least need to seek your opinion, and you need to think that I'm listening to you, even if I don't always agree with you in terms of story selection. And we need to get there. I will close on this. I think it is because this change has happened relatively fast, there's some blurry lines. The students think Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert are newsmen. It's funny, but it's not in the sense that I don't blame them. It's the first thing they've seen as young adults. It's what they see. And so they're still, in some ways, tuning in and learning. They're building a relationship with something that, when they were younger, they didn't bother reading the newspapers or watching the TV news. I didn't when I was their age, although my father used to throw the newspaper in front of us and make us read some of it. So there's blurry lines. If you turn on a TV during the day right now, try this in the next few days. Don't put the volume on. Just start clicking through the channels. It's all people in boxes. Because it's Oprah, fascinating show. She's a bazillionaire. Ellen DeGeneres, talk shows during the day, they're cheaper to produce. So all you have on television right now are people talking. Who's who? Who's a news person? Who's an entertainer? Who's just having fun? So we need to reinforce the lines, my opinion. I may be a dinosaur. They may farm me out. But when you see John King on television, I want you to say, here's a guy. He's human. He'll make mistakes. But I trust him. He's going to give me information. He's going to give me all sides of a story. And then I'm going to go and make my decision. Or I'm going to say, I have more questions, so I'll watch tomorrow. Or I have more questions, I'm going to get online. Or I'm going to go buy a magazine. Or I'm going to go buy a book. Or I'm going to find more information. Not, here's this guy on television trying to tell me what to think. That's not my job. Now, there are some in my business, using my business loosely, who have built a business model around trying to tell you what to think. Or to reinforce what you think. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I can get in trouble for that in some ways because they're my competitors. I don't think so. I don't. I trust in the common sense of everybody in this room and everybody in the country that, I'll name a few names. If you're watching Glenn Beck or Sean Hannity or Keith Olbermann or any of those people like that, watch them if you like them. That's your right and your choice. If you think you're watching a newscast, you're wrong. But I don't think you do if you're watching those programs. You're watching them because they have provocative personalities that you find entertaining. They might generally book along the political lines of your thinking. That's great. Of course you read, you don't buy boring books. You buy books you like to read. Why wouldn't you watch shows you like to watch? But when you're making a big decision, I would hope you'd want to know what the other side thinks. And I would hope maybe every now and then we change our minds. The older we get, the more we change our minds. Some people would say the older we get, the less we change our minds. So I still think there's a market for middle-of-the-road journalism that can be interesting, provocative, have a feisty debate, but invite all sides in the room and have an anchor driving the discussion who does not have a dog in the fight. I believe that. If I'm wrong, then I'll be unemployed in a few years. But I believe that with all my heart.
I don't know whether they were clapping about your comment or whether you were going to be unemployed in a few years. But welcome to my world, John. Tell us about your new show, and then also give us some insight into a guy who did come here and speak and certainly was a national voice on immigration, whether you agreed or disagreed with him. To talk about your new show, and then Lou Dobbs leaving, and where is he going, and what's he doing?
Lou is a friend, and I wish him the best. Lou became a subject of a great deal of controversy, and he was here. If you were here to listen to him, you know he's perfectly capable of speaking for himself. He's a feisty guy. I don't want to look in the rearview mirror, and I don't want to get involved in the controversy. I had nothing to do, was not involved in his decision to leave. If you've noticed from following the interview since he left, both he and the management of the company say it was amicable. They just decided that he wanted to do something a little bit beyond what he was allowed to do on CNN, so he wanted to go elsewhere. And that was his choice, and he'll do very, very well in whatever he does. I will say this, that I know Lou's staff very well, and one of the ways I judge a person is by how they treat the people around them. And his staff loves him. He is a cantankerous, feisty, driven guy who would work his staff incredibly hard, and yet every single one of them would jump in front of a bus for him. That's my judge of a person. I'm not passing any judgment on his political views or what he did on television. His staff respects him and loves him, and that tells me something about who he is as a leader. To Lou's credit, if we wind the clock back, whatever you think of Lou and his opinions, if we wind the clock back and we think about the power and the importance of the immigration issue, the power and the importance of what he called the middle-class squeeze, the power and the importance of how people feel, again, whether this is factually right or not, how they feel that Mexico and China and India are taking their jobs. Lou is ahead of the curve on a lot of these issues and bringing them to the forefront. Did he go beyond the lines of objectivity? I'll let others decide that. That is a source, of course, of some of the controversy. I will say this in closing on this point, as I wish him the best. Lou's viewed his job, he was comfortable with advocacy journalism. He was advocating positions. Now, CNN, a lot of people have criticized my network for this, and that's everybody's right. If you listen to that show, it began unlike any other show on CNN. It's at an hour of news, opinion, and commentary. We did not try to pretend it was a straight newscast. In the end, they made a decision, it didn't fit, and they're moving on. Again, I wish him the best. I don't view my job that way. I'm not an advocacy journalist. I'm not saying that's wrong or bad, but it's not where we have decided to go as a direction as a network, and it's not how John King does his job. I don't wake up in the morning saying it's my job to help or hurt Barack Obama. I don't wake up in the morning saying it's my job to help or hurt the Democrats or the liberals and the conservatives. I wake up every day as somebody with a great passion for what I do, and I hope an unending curiosity to say, what's the biggest story? How do I get a piece of it? I want to take a look at it. I want to go see it. I want to touch it. I want to feel it. I want to take the 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 most interesting people in that debate and let them have their say and ask them questions and compare what they say today to what they said a week ago, a month ago, and a year ago. And don't just say you're an idiot if they've changed their mind. Ask them why. Maybe they have a good reason. Or maybe they don't. And maybe they're inconsistent flip-floppers. Not my decision. That's your decision. My job is to give the people on the big issues of the day that matter to your lives a chance to make their case. Ask the right questions. Supplement those interviews with the information. What's in the health care bill? Who are the Taliban? Where are those kids going to Afghanistan coming from? And what are we doing to help their families when they're gone? My job is to put those things out there, ask good questions, hopefully have a provocative and interesting conversation that gives everybody their say, and then you decide. And I think if I do that in a way that's interesting, that people will want it.
I'll quit. I'll ask one more, then we'll throw it open. Give us, if you can, what do you think in terms of crystal ball, looking at 2 or 3 people that your thoughts just briefly about? One whom we're very interested in Arkansas is Mike Huckabee. The other one is Hillary Clinton. And finally, the person she invited for coffee, Sarah Palin. They could have coffee on your show, John.
It's my crystal ball. If Senator Clinton and Governor Palin would like to have coffee, I would pay for it.
Somebody needs to Twitter that.
Look. Who is the first one?
The former governor who has a talk show on one of your competing networks.
You know, the former governor is a very interesting guy, and I think he proved in the last campaign something you knew before the country knew it. He's a very interesting, very entertaining, very funny, and a very folksy guy. He came up short. Why did he come up short? We could spend hours debating that, and we would have differences of opinion. Was he little known? Did he not have enough money? The Republican Party generally, unless there's a rock star coming out of the blue, it's whose turn is it? That has been the tradition of the Republican Party. I will say this about Governor Huckabee, he came about that close to having a chance at the Republican nomination. And Fred Thompson did well in one state, and that was South Carolina. And if Fred Thompson had not done so well in South Carolina that night, Mike Huckabee would have won that state, and John McCain would have been done, over, by, gone. And if that had happened, what would have happened after that? None of us know. But you would have had the guy whose turn it was out of the race. And then that's what makes politics so much fun. My first campaign for president was when Mike Dukakis ran, and the only reason I got to cover it is I was the Boston State House guy, and all those really smart people in Washington said, there's no way that short little Greek guy's going to win. You cover him, kid. And so I got to cover him, and the short little Greek guy did okay, up to a certain point. But Governor Huckabee has enormous communication skills, and he is, on the issues, in touch with a significant slice of the Republican Party base. If you look at is he running next time? You'll have to ask him. I mean, he's got a pretty good job right now. He moves around the country. He's doing enough that makes me believe that if he makes that choice and that right now he's doing everything he thinks he needs to do so that he can run, if he wants to run. If you look at the polling right now, Romney, Huckabee, about 20% each, Palin right up around there with them, then Governor Pawlenty comes in under that, Governor of Minnesota. It's an interesting group of people. You always look back, is this a good field? Is this a good field? It's not a bad field. He learned a lot. You learn a lot when you run. Skip can tell you that. You learn a lot. You learn your mistakes. You learn what you're doing wrong. You learn, as I said earlier, that even if you're running in a primary, the country in some places is very different than it is where you're from. So I think he's a force. I think Senator Clinton would like to be president. Secretary Clinton would like to be president of the United States. Will that opportunity afford itself? I don't know. I think that it is remarkable how well she has been reviewed across the political spectrum. Republicans are big fans of her work as Secretary of State. They think, as they did in the Senate, they respect her as someone who's a very, very, very hard worker, who, even if you agree with her 100%, who knows her stuff and studies her stuff. For her, the question is timing in politics. There's a theory in Washington, D.C., that President Obama, having witnessed what just happened to the Republicans, first time in more than 50 years, not a president or a vice president running for the party's nomination because Vice President Cheney didn't run. So if you're Barack Obama, do you face pressure to remove Vice President Biden? Because most people think he's too old, that he would not run for president down the road. Do you do that? Do you take a chance when you run for re-election? Do you try to set yourself up, if you think you're going to win a second term, to set yourself up generationally? Sounds Machiavellian, doesn't it? But it is one of the calculations. And in that scenario, one of the reasons some of us crazy cynics say the reason all these high-quality people were willing to serve in the Obama cabinet is they think there might be a little bit of a job opening. Is that true? Who knows? But in Washington, we have water cooler conversations about things like this. But she is a remarkable and accomplished person who has gone a long way from the days when there was a big debate in this state over her name and what name she should use. Governor Palin, I would just put in the same category. Governor Palin is having a very brief entry on the national stage is already a polarizing figure on the scale of Bill Clinton and George W. Bush. There's not many people who say, I'm not so sure about her. They either love her or they can't stand her. And I don't know what that means. She gets her little piece. I will say this on this point, that if you think back to 1991, maybe you thought Bill Clinton was tough enough and good enough to win the election, whether you liked him or not. You thought, you knew him, you'd watch him fight, and he was a good politician and he might fight. But the country said, no way. What did George Bush call him? The failed governor of a small state, right? He was never going to win the White House. George W. Bush came along. He was the spoiled rich kid with a famous name. No way. He's going to be president of the United States. A 47-year-old black guy who's been in Washington for 3 weeks, who's never run anything, he's going to be president of the United States? Come on. So before you put Sarah Palin in the never going to happen category, I would just say, look at history. The American people, Ronald Reagan was an actor who was in movies with chimps. So the American people are pretty forgiving people, and they give you second chances. They give you second chances. So if she wants to be a serious player, she will have a chance. Will she take advantage of it? That's why we watch. That's why we have elections. But for those who say, no way, I would say read the history books.
That's why we're glad to have, this is good conversation, ladies and gentlemen. This guy knows his stuff. All right, let's throw it open to you all. Let's raise your hand, please, and we'll get a microphone to you. Bill, there's one right up here. Annie, will you hold your hand up there so Bill can get you the mic? And I'd ask everybody to please keep their questions short so we can get a lot of them in.
I am one of your addicts.
Thank you.
Following up on the paradigm shift of technology and an advocate of participatory democracy. And the technology has provided that many of us feel we're almost equal to you because we have that kind of classroom. Is democracy safer or is it in danger because of the technology and the world classroom that the world is going through now?
That's a fascinating question.
Did y'all hear the question? Could you hear it? Is the world safer, democracy safer as a result of technology?
It's a fascinating question, and I would answer it this way first. You can't put this genie back in the bottle. And so you can either run and hide from it, or we can learn. And the 2000 election was a telling turning point here, because we were just, this butterfly ballot thing, which is the old way. And yet, the failures in that election and the questions about that election have made people incredibly skeptical about voting using either the touch screens or voting online. Some states have voting by mail. It has increased participation, but it also increases questions. All these other things I talked about earlier that have increased mistrust of institutions. You want to be the guy who comes forward right now and says, I'll vote online. You don't have to show up. You don't have to see your IDs. So we have to figure out, when it comes to participation in democracy, we of course have to draw some lines for credibility. And I think that's probably going to be a 25-year soul searching. Some states will push the button. The laboratory of the states is a cliche, but it's also true. Some states will push the envelope. One or two will have amazing success. One might have a dramatic failure. And we'll figure out what works and what doesn't. And 25 years from now, it'll look very, very different. I think in terms of how we vote, that will be a slow transition because it is so personal and it is so important. In terms of how we participate, Howard Dean taught us how to raise money on the internet. Then Barack Obama came along and taught us more about how to organize on the internet and how to actually turn people out without people who never actually looked each other in the eye were part of communities and conversations and a movement. And now, trust me, the Republicans have studied this very well. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing. We should all learn from each other. A good, healthy, vibrant democracy is a competition. So my business has changed dramatically in our role in this. If you watch the election coverage, I had this fancy little map I used to touch and go through. It scared the bejesus out of me. But I learned enormously from it. And you can teach old dogs new tricks to a degree. And it made it more interactive. it made it accessible, and we put it online so you could go look at it yourself. You can now find so much information because of technology that it raises the bar for me. I need to find ways to give you value-added information. If I tell you things you already know, you're going to do this. And you should do this because you have other places to go, either for more information or if there's no quote-unquote news out there, then watch something to entertain you and have some fun. Don't sit there watching stuff you already know. I have a simple rule about this. News to me is new, and you slap an S on it. If it's not new, it's not news. And so that doesn't mean it can't be a story you already know about. We can give you new information, new context, new insight, a new voice that might change your mind or open your mind. But this wonderful explosion has some risks. It has changed my business. It's a little scary, but you can't put the genie back in the bottle. So we just have to have fun with it and learn from it and admit it when we're wrong and go back. We had a hologram in our election last year. I don't think you've seen that since. It was, I'm an old AP wire service dinosaur. Yet I think it was the right thing to try. Somewhere down the road, Oprah or Larry King will use this technology. Because if I'm sitting here like this and I'm looking you in the eye, we're going to have a conversation. Whereas if you think about a TV screen, two boxes, my face here, her face here. That's how most TV interviews are conducted. You can't see the person. That hologram technology is not just a gimmick. That person is in a three-dimensional room, and when I do this, she can see my eyes. And it makes it more conversational. Somewhere down the road, that technology has an application in what we do because it's a more interesting, more relevant, more intimate conversation. Therefore, you just feel more comfortable and you say more. So it has a role somewhere. We're just not ready for it yet. And when we do it, we need to figure out how to make very clear to you, transparent to you, that she's not here. But we're using this technology to make it more intimate. We need to be honest with you as we use the technology. And it's a generational thing. It changes every day.
Questions? Let's see. Julie, right there.
Hi, my name is Julie. I'm a student here at the Klin School. Thank you for being here tonight and for giving the students an hour to pick your brain. We really appreciate it. Dean Rutherford might get a little upset with me because it's a multi-part question. But I was wondering if you view journalism as a public service. If so, why? And if so, how do you transcend the role of being an advocate in your goal of being objective as a journalist?
This can be a dangerous question because we are supposed to watch. We're not part of the process, and yet we're always around the process. I don't know if I would use the term public service, but I would use the term part of our public life. And I come at it from a very simple perspective, and maybe I'm naive. My dad was a jail guard in Boston, Massachusetts. My mother raised 7 kids, didn't work for a very long time, then she went back to work in a bank. My dad was providing a service to the community. My mom, whether she was staying at home raising children or then went back to work, was providing a service to the community. The guy who brought the mail every day was providing a service to the community. When my car breaks down, somebody is going to fix it for me. He's providing a service to the community. When I get sick, a doctor does or a nurse does or some practitioner does. People who teach, who take the time for less money than they could make somewhere else to teach our children are providing the biggest service and the greatest service that communities have. It's part of our circle. Within that circle, you need information to make your decisions. I need the health care you provide me. I need the stuff you make in your bakery. I need the food you make in your restaurant when I sit down. And you need information to make your decisions. That's my piece of it. That's how I view it. Is that a public service? It's part of a community. It's part of a community. And as I said with the students, newspapers have stopped covering local news a lot because of the restrictions, the very tough economy now for print journalism. I hope this changes. But if you go online, and I'm sure this is true here, there are citizen journalists who go to school committee meetings and write about them. Now, do they use the same rules I use? Probably not. But they're performing an invaluable service in their community because they're telling people where the money is being spent or what books are being used. And sometimes that sets off really violent debates within communities. But debates are fine as long as we all just, yell at each other and then figure it out. That's a good thing. So I don't know if it's a public service. People say, I'm not part of elective politics, they don't pay me. There are people now, because of the troubles in the print journalism industry, who want to set up these foundations to support investigative journalism. I'm all for that if the money is coming from private sources. There are people who have proposed having the money come from government sources. That scares me. It just scares me because I just think that we need, again, you need to trust us. You need to trust us, and trust of my business is way down. So I think anytime you get government money involved, even if their hearts are in the right place, they're trying to do a good and admirable thing, but you got to keep the government money out of it. In terms of personal bias, you just have to know who you are. We're human. We're trained not to bring our biases to work. We're still human beings. And if there's something you know that you feel passionately about, you need to either recuse yourself completely, or if you have no choice, talk to people you trust and make sure, show them your product and say, look, this one's important to me. Am I being fair here? And you just have to every day. And if I've said this before and I will say it again, if you make a mistake, don't hide it. Fix it immediately. Just look people in the eye and say, I made a mistake. Is there anybody in this room who's never made a mistake? If you just look them in the eye and say, I've made a mistake, they'll give you credit for it.
Question, yes, sir, right here, right up here.
John, we're used to you being at that map with this is a blue state, this is a red state, and counting them and everything. Do you think with the young people coming up that are asking so many questions and learning, and at this school, for example, and all over the country, that they're making decisions for themselves, so the demographics will gradually get much harder to predict because they're making their own decisions, not necessarily voting the way their parents did or maybe their parents were. Is that happening, or do you still see the country defined by the blue states or red states and so forth?
I think the best answer I can give you is yes and no, in the sense that I do think that people are less and less affiliated with political parties. Doesn't mean you've changed your views. It's that you don't like institutions, you think they take too much money, you think they're too beholden to special interests in Washington or in Little Rock, and so you might say you're a liberal, and a lot of people say I'm a liberal, I'm not a Democrat, or I'm a liberal who tends to vote Democrat, but I'll vote for somebody else if I think they're the better person. You saw a lot of that. The pool of independent voters has grown dramatically in the past few years. Most of them are Republicans who got disgusted with Bush or the Republican Party in Congress for spending too much money, or they oppose the Iraq War, or they have a grievance within the Republican portfolio, and they just said, I can't be one of these people. So they're conservatives, but they're independents. They still tend to vote conservative. So that it's very hard to judge the next election by how independents voted in the last election, because by very nature of the term, it will be the pool of independents will be different next time based on what's happening in the country and who has grievances with which party has more people with more grievances against it who then decide their independence. I do think there's a great opportunity in the country for independent candidates to come along and be heard, but the system is built to defeat them. That's the one thing the two parties agree on. Do not allow an opening in the system, in the rules, that would allow more independent candidates to start winning. I do think, we talked about this a bit earlier, that if a Ross Perot were to come along at this moment with that kind of money, if a Michael Bloomberg were to do it with that kind of money, would they win? I don't know. But would they make a statement? Would they draw a lot of people who are disaffected? Yes, they would. I think that's one of the challenges next year. There are a lot of, this again, 45 states, there are a lot of liberals out there who thought Barack Obama was the anti-war candidate who was going to get us out of Iraq yesterday, not send more troops into Afghanistan, reform health care in a nanosecond, and fix the economy. Is that fair? Of course not. Of course not. But you project what you want onto the candidate you support. And so they see, yes, we're getting out of Iraq, but not as fast as they would like. He's going to send, has already sent more troops into Afghanistan, and he may send 30,000 more still. Will they sit at home next time? Will they vote for an independent? How will they voice their frustration? That's one of the fascinating questions of the next election. So the rules are built for the two parties. There is a growing disaffection with the parties that creates this independent in the middle. The big question for me for young people, African American turnout was up nationwide and up significantly if you look at different pieces of the puzzle. Young turnout was not up as much as some people had predicted it would be, but in some parts of the country it was last year. Neither African Americans or young people turned out in anything other than normal, low, off-year election numbers in New Jersey and in Virginia and in the congressional special election. So one of the defining questions for the country and for the Democratic Party right now is, did Barack Obama create a Democratic movement, or did Barack Obama create a Barack Obama movement? Is it individual? Is it about him and not about other things? And if you're trying to build a party, then that's an interesting question. When Bill Clinton was elected president, I was among the idiots from Washington, convinced that the Democratic Party was going to become a more centrist party, that they were going to learn the lesson that Bill Clinton and the Democratic Leadership Council were trying to teach it, that Walter Mondale and Michael Dukakis were too far to the left, we're sick of losing, let's move back to the middle. That is not what we have now. That is, we have a Democratic president, and a pretty popular Democratic president, and an extremely popular Democratic president among Democrats, who is significantly to the left of William Jefferson Clinton. 10 years ago, I don't think anyone would have told you that's where we were going. That's what makes my job so much fun, because it's unpredictable.
Question. Yes, right over here. Kim, go ahead. She'll give you a...
Hi, my name is Kim Caldwell. I'm also a student at the Clinton School. Thank you so much for the time you've spent with us. And one of the things that's really stuck out in the way that you talk about the news is you're always using business terms. And I understand very clearly that CNN is a business, and yet here we are in the School of Public Service, and you spoke to Julie earlier about kind of how we all provide a service as a community. But you also spoke earlier about the stories that you should cover more versus the ones that you do. And I ask, how do you as a journalist responsibly balance what should be covered and what people will watch?
It's a great question. It is a business. And if people don't watch and advertisers don't spend, then I'm back moving pianos or tending bar, two very honorable jobs I've had in the past. And I'm probably too old to move pianos. Well, I wouldn't mind giving it a try. Look, there are a number of competing voices when you have these discussions, and it is one of the defining debates of our time. I can only speak for myself, and I can only really speak from 11 months' experience, because John King has only had a program that he is the anchor of on Sundays for 11 months. And in that period of time, I'm sure I've made a lot of bad calls. But one of the things that I obsess about is getting my butt out of the chair in Washington and getting out in the country. Because one of the things I've learned in 25 years of covering politics is, as much as Washington thinks it has something to tell the country often has something it wants to tell Washington. And so I'd like to hear about it before people vote. That would make me a smarter reporter if I'm out talking to people and having breakfast with them and going to their community health care clinics or going to their school committee meetings or going to the factory floor where it's 2,000 people or 5,000 people or 10,000 people just were told their jobs won't be there on Monday. That's what I do. I have gone to Iraq and I have put the generals from Iraq and Afghanistan on my program and been screamed at times, saying that's not a great thing for ratings. People don't like that story. Well, it's an important story, and sometimes we need to tell it. It's important. As I said with the students, I had the privilege of being at Fort Hood last week, the memorial service. I think my business does a disservice if we only talk about the sacrifice of the young men and women in the military and their families at a big memorial service. It's not terribly uplifting sometimes. But these are our neighbors, and in many cases they're your sons and daughters, or they're your cousins or your brothers and your sisters. And the wars have become very political, and therefore they're not great stories from a ratings perspective. In that case, I just think as somebody who spent a lot of time in military communities, that I said this with talking to Skip and with the students, and I'll say it here, I think it is a defining question of the next 25 years. There are some big defining questions in the world. You know, where's China going? It's a fascinating story. Where's the economy going in America? Are we still the preeminent nation in the world economically? It's a fascinating question that we need to cover. That will be the economic story of the next 25 years, is what is globalization in China and India and the energy and the climate debate and the trade debate? What does that do to change America? That's sort of an external global question. At home, we're having this big healthcare debate. It's about who we are. Maybe we'll sort it out, maybe we won't. We occasionally have these things come upon us that we don't choose directly, that are defining issues. And I think how, having been to Walter Reed and been in a lot of military installations around this country in the last few years, and having been to Iraq a few times, that we have a defining question before us as our character as a people, is what are we going to do with all these kids who have lost limbs, who have traumatic brain injuries that we do not understand yet. The doctors, as hard as they're trying, just don't understand yet what it's like to to be around all these explosions all the time, to be jumbled and everything. And we can turn our eye because we oppose the war, or we can turn our eye because it's going to cost billions of dollars, and we're going to make mistakes along the way. Or we can decide, maybe I didn't want you to go to that war, but I will spend every damn dime I have to figure this out. And it's not discussed enough, because I don't think people quite understand. We're talking about more than 700,000 young men and women have rotated through Iraq and Afghanistan the last 8 years. And we have no idea, 5 or 10 years from now, how many of them are going to need help. And it's not a sexy story. And I can tell by the faces in this room, it's not a happy story, is it? But it's a story that you're going to see on my program, whether you watch or not, because it's important. And it is a defining test of who we are as a people and as a country, not just our political system, but who we are, because the people in this room decide what the political system does by showing up and saying, I don't want my kids reading those books, I don't want you serving that food in the lunchroom, I don't want you to vote for that Senator Lincoln, I do want you to vote for that Senator Lincoln. Governor, why did you do that? And Congress, Mr. President, and everybody else, why aren't you helping these people and giving them everything they need? That's part of my job.
Questions? Bob, we got one back there at the very back. This lady,
You said you've been to close to 80 countries now, but I can't think of 80 in-depth stories from 80 countries that I've seen on CNN lately. What can you do to bring more international news to CNN so that we know a little bit more about countries before we send troops there? Thank you.
Well, let me deal with the first half of the question, but I understand the second half of the question. When I came to CNN, it was the only, Fox was just coming along, and MSNBC, I'm not sure had been born yet, or maybe just born. But in terms of the news networks, it was the only network that covered international news, and we did it with relish, and we did it with joy. And it was the best thing in my life from a learning experience, because I had to learn about all these things that a kid from Dorchester, Massachusetts knew nothing about. I thought I knew a lot about politics and learned about domestic issues, but I didn't know anything about most of these places in the world, and I had to learn, because we not only had CNN domestic, but we have an international network that would want me to go on and to talk about Bosnia and Kosovo, and to talk about Russia and the breakup of the Soviet Union, and we're 20 years now after the collapse of the Berlin Wall and all the fascination of that, and then President Clinton spent so much time on the Middle East. It was the best learning experience. It's like going back to school. We don't do enough of it, in my opinion, on CNN domestic, in part because of the question the young lady just asked. Many Americans think they don't want to watch it. I don't actually think that's true. I think if it is interesting, you will watch it. I think we just tend to say, oh yeah, here's a couple things that happened in the world today, blah, 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 move on, because we don't think you're interested. Well, I think it's like anything else. People always say, you can't cover education on television, or you can't cover Medicare on television. Excuse me? How many people have children and grandchildren? How many people in this room are on Medicare, or are the children of people in this room on Medicare? If we can't tell those stories here and overseas in a way that's interesting, then it's time to get out of the way and let somebody else do my job. So we need to do more of it, in part because of the internet, and in part because of the accessibility of information, in part because you can click around and get it elsewhere. We've used that as an excuse, overly used it as an excuse. Sometimes it's legitimate. We have to make decisions about how much you can fit in 30 minutes or 60 minutes of a newscast. And international news is always the first to be jettisoned. I would argue that's not always the right call. And I would say I don't always win those arguments.
all right, yes, question right over here.
I was at the museum several weeks ago to see the premiere of Latinos in America. And to get into the premiere, I had to walk past a phalanx of anti-Dobbs protesters, and the producers couldn't answer any question except about Lou Dobbs, even though it was about this important series. And for the 300 or so folks in that room, CNN as an outlet had no legitimacy because of the Lou Dobbs program. What are you going to do to win back the interest and faith of those communities?
I share with you a little moment of life is full of funny coincidences. About 6-8 weeks ago, I agreed to be the master of ceremonies at an event in Miami. And that event was last night. And it was for a magazine called Poder, which is the Forbes of the Latino community. And they publish some in the United States, but they also publish all throughout Central and South America. And I was in a room with about 400 people about 98% of whom were of Hispanic heritage from all over. Cubans, Mexicans, Puerto Ricans, Guatemalans, Colombians, Venezuelans, some from those countries. And of course, I was walking into that room having committed to this some time ago, just days after I found out that I was taking over the 7 o'clock hour. 6 o'clock hour here in Little Rock, I guess. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do what I have done for my entire career, which is listen. My job is to listen. It's not the speech. I may have been uncomfortable sitting here in a public speech setting, but my job is to listen and learn. That's what I do, and I love it, because I learned so much from it. And what I told them is what I'll tell you. We're not going to agree on everything, but my door will always be open. I am not hostile to you, and actually I'm fascinated by you, because I cover politics, and politics is about math. And to the point I made about African American turnout and younger voter turnout last year, I am fascinated by that. When Skip was in the White House, I spent a lot of time traveling the country covering the Christian conservative movement, because it was growing across the country and it was starting to change our politics from the school committee level to the legislature level, electing governors and becoming a force within the Republican Party back in the late 80s, early 90s, and through that. I'm fascinated by that. As our industrial unions decline, what happens to the organizational base that was the Democratic Party? Politics is about math. And you'd have to be an idiot or hiding in a bunker to not understand what Latinos in America do to our political math, whether you like it or not. Whether you like it or not, if you have white skin like me, you will probably live to the day where you are not the majority in this country. You can, again, it's the same as technology. I can pretend it doesn't exist. It does. And I can't put the genie back in the bottle. I don't want to. It is who we are. It is how we're growing. I want to understand it. I want to watch it happen. Are we supposed to speak Spanish in our public schools? How do we find the resources to do that? I was in this amazing room with business leaders, CEOs, restaurant owners, Gloria and Emilio Estefan, these wonderful new Latino singers. It's affecting our language, our culture, our arts, our politics, our economy, our business, which means it's part of all of our lives. And so you are as welcome to call me and kick me as you are as welcome to call me and kick me as anyone in that room last night and anyone in this room is. And I want to understand what you mean to the puzzle we put together. And when it comes to Latinos in America, it's just a simple fact. They're becoming every day a bigger part of the puzzle, not just in how we vote, but in our everyday life. And it will play out faster at the local level because of these challenges in our schools. And look, at a time of 10.2% unemployment, in some states 15, 16% unemployment, that will sometimes cause resentment. When people are anxious, they tend to get scared. And when they get scared, they tend to look for somebody to blame. And we're going to see this play out. And my job is to cover it and watch it and to try to do it in a responsible way. So that if you think, my God, I don't want them doing this in my schools, or my God, I do want them doing this in my schools, my job is to let everybody have their say. And so for the people out there who aren't sure, or who are open-minded, who might have an opinion today, but are just like, I believe, 99% of the American people, just open-minded and willing to listen to the other person, give them a chance to listen, and then people will decide.
Question. Yes, we got a question right back here.
Which political figure has been your toughest interview?
That's a good question.
That's a great question. That I don't have a reflexive answer should tell you something. I'm a student of this, so I try not to make judgments about anything, because if I start making judgments about things in my life, then I'm bringing a bias to my next conversation about these things. Who is the toughest interview? It's hard to answer in part because it really depends on the moment. If you were interviewing Bill Clinton around the impeachment period, he was a tough interview because he was not a happy camper. And he didn't give a lot of interviews, mind you. But sometimes he decided he had to. Very tough. Senator and now Secretary Clinton is I would say, I wouldn't describe as the toughest interview, but who is among, if not the most disciplined person you will talk to. Sometimes you just cannot get her to go off what she wants to say. That's okay. You can only ask. I'm just trying to think. I mean, George W. Bush gets criticized in many quarters. A lot of people think he's not that bright. You don't get elected president of the United States. You don't beat Ann Richards, not being bright. He may not have been curious about some subjects, and things may have gone awry, and we can have that conversation if you want to have it. But he was a tough interview in some ways. This is people roll their eyes at me sometimes when I say this, but I'll tell you that. Let me close with this one. I found George W. Bush and Bill Clinton to be more alike as politicians, not their positions, not their ideology or their beliefs, but as politicians in how they communicated and how they carried themselves, to be much more alike than different, in the sense that they knew how to be guys in the locker room, pat you on the back, lighten you up with a story. With Clinton, it was always about who are you, where you're from, tell me about your family. With Bush, maybe it was sports, but just very sort of, they try to, and it's part of the game. Hey, it's nice, it's fun to tell stories and joke with the President of the United States, but you have to know all along the way, they're trying to disarm you and just take you down and knock you off your game. And that's part of the game. That's what makes it fun.
All right, we have time for one more question. Dewi, right here.
Thank you, Dean Rutherford. Thank you, Mr. King. I think I consider myself lucky because I meet the luckiest person on earth alive. My question is, you mentioned about the media that appears on the society, like citizen journalism. How do you see the growth of this journalism in the society? Do you see this as a failure to the mainstream media, or do you see it as an alternate of the media that people can really be a journalist? For instance, I get a camera and I see something happen on the road. I can just take picture, put on my blog, and suddenly I become citizen journalist. Thank you.
I think that if you are dedicated to the notion, the principle, that we are a nation of free speech and right to assembly and right to say as we please, then we're all citizens, and as citizens we have rights to say things and to post things. Does that make you a citizen journalist? Some people describe themselves that way, and it's a challenge, again, to the fee-based journalism industry, meaning buy the newspaper, pay for cable television so you get CNN, pay to go online to read something. It's a bit of a challenge, but I view it as a challenge. I don't view it as a threat. Again, if you're thirsty for information, you will look for it in many places. And in some places, citizen journalism is filling a void where journalism, either for financial reasons or for oversight reasons or for laziness reasons or for any number of reasons, this isn't covering certain stories anymore. And citizens are saying, this is important to me and it's important to my neighbors. So I'm going to go and I'm going to write a blog about this. Photos a little different. Pictures don't lie. I mean, I guess you could use Photoshop. You can. If you want to manipulate stuff, you can. But for people who post things, we have this thing at CNN called iReport. We ask people to contribute. If you see, something horrible or something remarkable or something wonderful, send us a picture. We'd like to have that. We get a lot of that when there are hurricanes and tornadoes and things like that. That's great. That's people participating in the process. On my end, if we're going to put it on what you call the mainstream media, that title has become almost like insurance salesman. We have to police it. We have to fact check it. We can't just put it out there and say we know this to be true until we take the time to check it. But if you want to have a blog or post on your blog, it's a wonderful thing. It's the same thing as having a conversation in this room. And now, some of those things are not factually accurate. Some of those things are ideologically driven or opinion driven. Somebody has an opinion. The head of the school committee is an idiot and I want him or her gone. But there's nothing wrong with that. Now, it's not, again, I can't do that. It's not my job. But for people to have these blogs, to say this is an information place or a citizen journalism place, it's a great thing. It's the same conversation you have around the table or around the office water cooler or in your community or in your restaurant. And you will decide, because you're all people of common sense, whether I trust it or not. If you read it enough, the bias of the person writing it, if there is a bias, will become clear to you because you have common sense. And so, again, great. It's the gift of technology. It makes the world more cluttered. It gives you more choices. And it can make it more confusing, without a doubt. But we can't stop it. So we all just have, you made a decision to come here tonight. You made a decision with all the busy things in your life that you were going to take an hour to go listen to this idiot from Washington. We make choices. And so when we look for information, we do the same thing. And so you will decide, I only have time to watch this newscast. I only have time to read this one newspaper. I only have time to get this magazine, because I trust that if you're really busy, you pick the 2 or 3 or 4 things you trust, and you stick with them until they violate your trust, and then you go somewhere else. It's the same thing in the proliferation of blogs and citizen journalism and posts. If you're curious enough about something, you're planning a big trip, maybe you buy 3 guidebooks. You go online and you look at all these things. If you've been there before, maybe you only need to buy 1 because you know it. You'll make your own decision, and you'll go hunting, and over time, you'll decide whether or not you trust something. And if you trust it, you'll keep reading it, and if you don't, you'll stop. We can't stop people from speaking. That's why we're here to begin with, and that's why, look around the room, that's why such a diverse group is here to begin with, because that was the whole idea. And unless we're going to go back to the beginning and say we didn't mean it, then we can't change the rules just because technology has changed our lives. We have to embrace it, and we have to figure it out. When it gets messy and it gets confusing, we have to figure it out. It's not so bad. We just got to all decide with our common sense what to do.